My guest here today is Rick Anwyl. He's the senior strategist with a global branding communications design firm, Sun & Sons, based here in Atlanta. Canon has retained Sun & Sons to help us with our own rebranding effort, and we wanted to bring to you some of the expertise that we've been able to benefit from over the last year as they've helped us through this project. So tell me a little bit about brand, and what I'd like to hear is kind of the way you sat down with us and started to talk to us about brand.
Sure. The way that we engage with brand is really, it starts with understanding business. And the reason we exist as a firm and the reason branding is important to us is that it fundamentally is there to support business. Without business, we don't have a job. So we view branding and brand communications as an integral part of how businesses, organizations, or individuals sort of advance what it is they want to achieve. So that's really the fundamental tip of the spear for how we look at engagements. And whether that's, again, an individual, an institution, a nonprofit, a public company, everybody has a different agenda. And we tend to characterize those or try and identify, what the corporate ambitions are a company is looking for. And that really is sort of the inception point of our engagements.
I remember in one of our first meetings, you shared with us some information that we had also stumbled upon a few years ago, and it was a book by Simon Sinek, Start With Why. And I remember as you started to share with us kind of your perspectives around that, how that linked into brand. It was it was in harmony with the way we talk about personal branding with advisors. But share with me a little bit about how that gets baked into the process.
Sure. The way that he talks about it is that if you look at an organization and you start to have conversations with leadership or anyone within the organization, most people, most organizations can tell you what it is they do. In large measure, they can tell you how they go about doing that. But what they can't do with clarity, and I'll explain how this fits to brand, is tell you why, why it is they exist. And as Simon points out, they talk about, well, we're in it to make money. Well, money is an outcome from what you do. We're talking about a higher purpose, a bigger why for the existence of the organization. And as we were having those conversations, remember you guys going, that correlates directly with how we talk about brand on an individualized basis for our financial advisors and how that all fits together.
Well, that then led into, I think, one of our initial conversations where you took us through your process.
Sure.
In terms of what you bring to the table to help an organization think through that. And I think, for our listeners and our viewers here, there's a parallel in terms of things they can do themselves as they think about creating their own personal brand. But take us through a little bit the process that you have.
Love to. And the process that's used is fundamentally, okay, I'm going to emphasize, fundamentally it's the same with most firms. I think what's unique about what we do and what Sun & Sons has developed is the process that we characterize as truth, beauty, and impact. And so when we start to talk about truths, we talk about it, what we characterize, we have a mandala, we call it, but we start with those corporate ambitions, the center of the bullseye, and then you start looking at the business truths. What it is, again, we want to aspire, how are you structured, what are some of the challenges you may face from a business perspective. We look at the emotive truths around a business and its brand, how it currently is communicating, what it is it stands for, how it's being perceived, and how it believes it's being perceived. And there's a whole series of questions that we'll ask and some digging that takes place there. Another set is the customer, and that's really key. The more information we can begin to understand about what the drivers are that motivate behavior relative to a client base or a customer base, what it is they're aspiring for or to do. What are some of the challenges that they face? The more of that we can understand, the better. What often surfaces out of that is some real clear insights as to the gap that exists between the perception an organization has about its customer base and the realities of that. And that gate swings both ways. You know, we surface things that you're going, oh my God, how are we going to tell them this? To they never even knew this existed, and this is incredible, the way that they're being perceived. But that customer or consumer truth is really important for us to surface. The other side of that is the marketplace. There's inevitably macro and micro trends that are starting to affect the way organizations are either being perceived or they're having conventional wisdom being challenged. Now, we talk about the changes that occur in the marketplace, and a lot of these changes are driven by technology and not just the pace, but the complexity of it, and what does that marketplace dynamic look like, and how does it affect that organization. So that's really the truth phase that we go through, and the outcome of all of that, we'll look at these straw man sort of archetypes, and we'll build those archetypes out as a reflection of what we believe the brand can represent. So at that point, there's this little swing into, let's start to think about strategically, where can that brand position itself in order to take into account the things that we have learned and begin to differentiate itself from the competitive set. That is really the truth phase of the process. And there's, again, it's a collaborative process. Brand communications as a whole, it's inherently collaborative. So we really engage, as you well know, with our clients, and there's a lot of push-pull. But we surface some really interesting things.
Well, it was a really important exercise that you took us through. As we started the process and having made the decision to go down this, one of the things we recognized is that gate swing, that we had a really strong brand reputation in some very specific areas, but it wasn't encompassing of all of our capabilities. And we learned a lot as you took us through that process.
I'll tell you, that was probably one of the more aha insights to come out of our truth phase. When we started talking to clients, and we're talking about, we talked to people who had been through the Canon program.
Yeah, these were Canon clients.
Yeah, Canon clients who had been through the program, some had been a quarter of a century ago, and they still talked about Canon and were able to almost instantaneously identify the value that you guys were able to bring to them. And a lot of these guys, moved through the elevated their careers. Many of them are in leadership positions now. And they talked about, we bring our guys back. We want our people. I need to have my people instructed by Canon. I need them to have that understanding. And so what does that all mean for us as branding experts? Well, it begins to absolutely qualify and quantify the value that Canon has in the market. Your brand recognition was huge. And so what was the effect of that? Early on, we were really challenging ourselves relative to the Canon name. A very common name. It also competes against whether your cameras or your copiers. There's a lot of challenges there. So one of the things we were looking at early on was, is our recommendation going to be that we need to let the Canon name go and adopt a new positioning that more closely aligned with what the corporate objectives were relative to growth? Out of the truth phase, what really became apparent was hell no. Not just no, but hell no. We'd be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so that became a core fundamental decision in how we were going to address the branding exercise. Some of the other things that we learned were, I mean, the amount of respect that people, the clients who have been through the program have. I mean, I think we characterize it as, they really view it as a badge of pride. It has had significant influence on them. Near term, as they move forward, coming out of the Canon exercise and classes, and longer term as they move through their careers. And so what's that all mean again to people like us? And it's going, well, we've got a value proposition here that says Canon is really starting to have, and has historically, a significant effect on people's lives. You guys change the way people's lives, the trajectory of their lives and their careers. And they're subsequently able to change the paths and the lives of the people who are their clients. So you affect your clients so that they can then in turn better affect their clients. That's a wonderful circle. There's a great story in that. And we really latched hold on that. And again, through the collaboration and the dialogue, that really became the foundation for where Canon was going to go as a brand. And it was characterized via the archetype as the guardian, the guardian archetype. So that was where we landed last.
Really good. In that truth phase, there's some things I think that our audience can glean from that as they think about their own personal brand. Certainly, the dynamic that can exist between the perception you want the public to have and the perception they actually have, and that can be limiting in terms of the way the engagements evolve with their clients and prospects. And so it's so important for them to think in terms of first what that why is and what that story is they want to put together, and to test that against the realities of the market, the demands of their clients, and kind of what their clients already know about them.
Yeah. I think the way that we characterize truth sometimes, and really this is the way Wade characterizes it, which I love, is he talks about authenticity. Mm-hmm. And getting to that genuine self and that self-awareness of your individual why. Mm-hmm. And whether that's an individual or a conglomerate, mm-hmm. It's still about being self-aware enough to identify why it is you're there and what the value is that you are individually are going to bring. So when you're talking about branding as an individual, and particularly as a financial advisor, I think you have to look at your audience and who it is you really want to affect, and what the effect is you want to have, and how do you translate that? What is it about you? Because this is the beautiful part. This is really great. Each one of us we're so special. And I think this is really true with the people in the financial services category. Individually, they're very unique, and they bring a set of skills, and they bring a point of view, and they bring a level of empathy and intelligence. And it's that empathy and that intelligence that really differentiates individuals. I think oftentimes when you're lumped into a category, and I know this is true within our industry, you tend to think that this is the walk I need to walk, this is the talk I need to talk. And you have to find that, we characterize it as voice, and I think it's really true for financial advisors when you talk about brand and identifying the truth and getting to the why. You really have to look at yourself and accept that you're special, that you have unique skills, You have a unique point of view that nobody else has. So how do you elevate that? How do you shine a light on it? And how do you bring that into the forefront and let that be the driver for your brand and who you are?
Now, as you get through that truth phase, what's the next step?
Sure. So as an outcome of the truth phase, we have a fundamental strategy and a positioning for the brand that we believe is going to be is correct, is genuine, it's authentic, and again, it's going to propel or accelerate the organization. So how do you bring that to life? And that's what we characterize as the beauty phase. It's the crystallization of truth, and it's the crystallization of truth in a visual form and in a written form. It's bringing it to life. And this is I think we characterize it as, we turn concepts into cupcakes. And I love that phrase because it really does begin to capture what it is we do from a creative perspective. It's how you take intelligence and translate that into a form and a format that can be shared with the world. And that's what beauty is about. So there's all kinds of mechanics in there. I mean, we look at typography and we look at graphics and we look at the totality of what a brand needs to do. But at the heart of it, it's really about how do we visually capture what it is that positioning platform is about.
Many of the people in our audience work for organizations where that identity's been defined, and for them it's about finding that voice of how they're going to tell their own story. Yeah. But we do have a fair amount of people in our audience who work in the independent side of the financial advisory business, where we're coming up with a visual identity as part of the process they may do for creating their own collateral and marketing. Without giving away what the visual identity is that Canon is going to go with, talk to us a little bit about kind of your thought process around what we were trying to communicate
Sure.
with our visual identity.
You bet. Without sharing what it is.
We're, by the way, about a week away from the official launch.
From the official launch.
So everyone will be able to see it on the website
Sure,
at that point.
sure.
But there were some themes and sentiments that we wanted to communicate.
Absolutely. I think, again, our process, the creative process, as much as anything, is about a distillation of the complex and how simple can you get it? How distilled can you make all of that? And then how do you translate that or articulate that? So we tend to characterize it as brand attributes. What are the attributes of a brand or the personality of a brand that we want to see communicated? So when we think about Canon, we think about things like wisdom and intelligence. We think about things in terms of stability and strength. It's a very strong brand, very much a guardian, a protector. You share that wisdom. So those begin to shape and inform how we may want to think about that from a visual perspective. You start to factor in other challenges that the business faces. If the mandate is growth and we're starting to extend beyond our current borders, we're working with international clients, then you have to think about and begin to factor in, all right, if we're going to visually represent a company this way, what does that symbol or flag begin to represent across the globe? And so there's another set of challenges there. I think the other things that we talk about are, when we think about Canon, is, again, back to the why. And why it is we exist. We help other people help other people. The guardian as a archetype works really well for Canon in another regard, and I think this starts to inform the brand a great deal. You guys not only train, you know, the advisors in the industry, you really are instructors for the regulators. You have an insight into compliance and are able to teach and instruct and inform compliance. Now, if you extrapolate that out, what you're really doing from our perspective is that you guys are informing the industry. You're leading, you're helping drive where the industry is going. And that's a really critical role. And it's a role that has huge responsibilities attached to it. It's not a role to be taken lightly. In the conversations I had with one of the folks in the UK when we were doing our truth phase, it was one of the first things that bubbled to the surface. You guys are on top of what's happening in the financial markets, in the Pacific Rim, and how that's beginning to affect the euro. And here's what's ultimately going to happen in the US, and that he's telling me about the conversations he's having with you guys on this subject. So that's like a big, just ding, ding, ding bell for us. We're going, these guys have their hands on the pulse of what's taking place in the financial services category. And not only do they have their hands on it, they're helping other people understand what is taking place. That's huge. And that's where that Guardian brand really starts to have some real hooks to it.
That got us through the beauty phase. Now the impact phase, and this is I guess we're right at the threshold of revealing our impact. How do you help organizations at that point?
Sure. It's where that your constituency, your customer, your client, really come in contact with an idea that has become a brand, and what's their brand experience, and what are the touch points for that brand. And we started to talk about the classroom situation. What's that experience like? What is it they see? What is said to them? What have they heard? What's the story that's been told that has brought them to Canon? So what's that experience really like? If you think about someone investigating, someone's, and a lot of this came out in the truth phase as well. A friend of a friend talking about the experience that they had at Canon and how it advanced their career. Somebody goes and they investigate. What's the experience going to be like when they go to the Canon website? What's the intellectual experience that they're going to have, and what's the emotional experience that they're going to have? What is it that is going to be represented visually from a Canon perspective that's going to touch them? What are those words? What does that imagery look like? One of the things we really discovered, I'm jumping back around again, but it's an important point, is that Canon historically had, from a visual perspective, taken on a very staid, very stereotypical financial services industry persona about it. And one of the things that came through from an emotive perspective that really affected the way that the brand has come to life through the beauty phase and what will ultimately be launched is that it needs to be more celebratory.
Now, when you talk about that, are you speaking to that in terms of what our visual identity was to that point? The icon that we had, the what we used to call the little Pac-Man C,
yeah,
right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
the way our literature and our website would be presented, that it was subdued.
Yes, that old identity was a little staid. It was very subdued. It fit within the acceptable boundaries of what a financial services related firm should be. Versus where we have ultimately, and where, again, truth led us, it's genuinely celebratory. It's very emotional. When people come through the program and they've been bust and hump for a week or 10 days, and they get that designation, they get that certificate, and that is a very emotional moment, not just for them, but for everybody in the room. And it is significant, and it is a moment of celebration. So we wanted some of that to begin to affect it and be effective with the brand and how we communicated. So in the impact phase, it's where all of those things come together. And whether it's a screensaver or a mouse pad, the experience that a student has when they first enter, it's the communication on the front side, and that's really when a brand comes to life. That's when you start to build equity. Now, this is really important, and this is important for everybody who's particularly inside Canon. A brand is a living thing. You know? Designers may create it, but companies build it, and they have to sustain it. It does not just sit and exist on its own. It is a living thing. So you have to continue to nurture it. You have to continue to look at it and let it evolve and grow. And that's how a brand becomes a good brand. That's how a good brand becomes a great brand. And that's how a great brand becomes an icon. And that's what you're aspiring to.
That's fantastic. And it aligns so well with the work that we do with the client-facing professionals at these financial services firms when we talk to them about their brand, right? And the steps that you've outlined here, the truth part, to be inward in your examination really of what your purpose is, to understand the perceptions of the marketplace, the perceptions of your clients, so that you can move to that beauty phase informed to be able to find the right voice, the right words to tell your story. And the impact part, well, we celebrate the excitement of coming out with maybe new collateral, new website, and all of the great visual identity that's been created. Probably the most important part is you have to live the brand. You have to deliver on the promise, and it's going to be an evolving exercise as you go forward.
Yeah, and we talk about the brand story, which is really the business story. It's the narrative arc for who you are, what you do, why you do it, and the value you deliver. And the simpler that story is, the more easily it can be internalized. And when it's internalized, when someone communicates it, they communicate it in their own way. And that's what you want. You want everybody inside Canon to be able to tell the story, the Canon story, genuinely, authentically, and that means telling it in their own way. I think it's a real mistake when organizations go, this is the script, stay on script, stay on script. Understand what the intent is and translate that accordingly. You can do that, then the brand will not just live, it'll grow.
That's fantastic. Great advice. Well, Rick, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for the work you've done for us at Canon. As you look to Canon's website, October 6th, you'll see all of the work Sun & Sons has brought to us embodied in our new website. You'll begin to see it in the collateral and the materials that you see, and you'll continue to see Canon delivering on that brand message, that brand identity. Now, Rick's firm is right here in Atlanta, Sun & Sons. I think you're on the internet if folks want to find you.
Last time we looked, we were.
They do a lot of work with financial services firms. But Rick, thank you very much.
Clark, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure as always.